Hello again and welcome back to another video where today we're going to be talking about a topic within game audio that I don't really see discussed that much. We're looking at mixing, kind of adjusting the levels and sounds and music of a game before you kind of finish it and send it off to be released to the world, I suppose. I mentioned in my last video that I was working on an indie game called Unspottable. It's a local party co-op kind of game. The objective, well, it's not really co-op, but the objective is to disguise yourself as like an NPC with a crowd of like 30 other NPCs. Find your friends who are also disguised and punch them and, you know, hit them and make sure they don't hit you in the process. And the last video I talked about a few things, the 5 things that I'd learned in the process of doing sound design for that. So if you haven't seen that video, definitely check that out. But today we're going to talk about how I kind of mixed and balanced all the levels of the audio for the game. Whilst I did the sound design and created all the sound effects, I didn't compose the music. That was done by my good friend Billy Palmer. You should definitely check him out. I'll put links to his Twitter and any other online profiles in the description. But whilst I didn't do the music, I did have the opportunity to balance his music with my sound effects within an Fmod project to then be sent to the developers of the game, who then integrated it into their Unity project. Now, unfortunately, I did not have the Unity project to hand. We didn't set up any kind of source control or way of sharing the project, and we were kind of running out of time once we got to the mixing stage. So when it came to balancing the audio, I had to improvise a bit. And I came up with a really unique way of mixing the Fmod project together, which is what I want to show you today. I took the Fmod project, which is what you're looking at now, and I'm going to show you this in a bit more detail later on. Took this project, and seeing as I didn't have access to the actual game in Unity, I created my own Unity project, a blank one, integrated the Fmod project with it, and then I kind of used it as a bit of I don't know how to describe it, to be honest, like a template. I wrote some code, and I basically came up with a way that I can trigger sounds on top of, you know, alongside of other sounds or other pieces of music to match scenarios that I knew would happen within the game. And by doing that, I created almost a kind of soundboard with my keyboard that I could use to trigger some sounds by pressing different keys on it for specific instances and levels within the game. Okay, so before we take a look at the Unity and Fmod projects, I feel like I should give you guys a little bit of context as to how this game is set up. So there's about 12 levels in this game, and these are the levels. This is the level select page here. Each level has its own scene in Unity, and so there's about 12 scenes in Unity plus a few extras. So this, what we're looking at now, is its own scene. There's also the start kind of slash menu scene. There's a scene for showing you your school. There's also a tutorial scene, and there might be 1 or 2 others, I can't quite remember. But what my plan was, and you'll see how in Unity and Fmod it's sort of set up similarly, is to treat every scene individually. So I would start with, say, the meadow level, or the meadow scene, and I would play it would play my Unity project, have all the kind of sounds for the meadow ready to activate on my keyboard by pressing certain letters and numbers, which I'm going to show you a bit more in a second, and just compare how they'd sound. I'd also kind of manually trigger them in ways that I knew they would be played within the game. So if I knew 2 sounds are likely to be played on top of each other, I'd probably press those at the same time, see how they sound. And then I'd just go along like that. So meadow, then the arena, then the school, then the prison, and so on and so forth. And we'll also do those extra scenes like this and the others I mentioned. So we've got all these folders, and within the folders are events for each of those scenes. So we've got a scene for the arena, the battlefield. What scenes did I show you? The meadows there, the sushi bar, the school, etc. etc. And there's also some extra ones. So for example, we've got one for the camera, which I think only has 1 in. That was for that scene we just looked at, where we're kind of moving the camera around each level before we select it. We've got a buttons folder, so that's anything for UI, basically. Flicking through the kind of menus and stuff, that's something that can happen pretty much anywhere, so that would be like a general sound. What else? Score, that's its own scene. Tutorial, that's its own scene. Player, these are some sounds that will be triggered by the actual players. So these are quite general, whilst excluding some scenarios, like the score level, where it shows you your scores at the end of each level. For the most part, these will be general, so we want to be able to trigger these whenever. And then if we take a look in Unity, you can see a similar sort of pattern where we've got game objects instead of events representing all those levels. So at the top, I'm going to ignore these few for now. At the top, we've got the one that represents all the general sounds. So I've got some scripts attached to the general sounds game object, which I'm going to show you in a bit, that allow me to trigger all those general sounds I mentioned. We've then got the game object for the start scene, game object for the tutorial scene, the level select page, score level, and then all the main kind of levels, so Meadow, Arena, Sushi Bar, Prison, etc. What my plan is to say I was testing the Meadow level. What I would do is, well, first of all, deactivate that. I would activate the Meadow level, make sure I've got the general sounds activated as well, because it always needs to be activated. Then I would play my scene, and then from there I'd listen to... Some things would obviously start on their own, so music I'd set up to start on its own, just like it would in the game, and then I would just test some sounds on top of it. Let's quickly dive deeper into what kind of scripts are attached to these game objects. So like I said, general sounds has all the general sounds that are going to play pretty much within any scene. But you can see that using this field here, the key field, I set up all these general sounds to trigger via the letters on my keyboard. So starting from Q would be what? Punch. Next one, W, would be hit human, and so on. It pretty much went, I don't know if you can see my keyboard, it pretty much went, cover the top row of letters. There's a few more starting at A and going along as well. So I can test those just by pressing those buttons. Then if I go to Meadow and show you what I've done, I've set up similar things, but this time for the scene-specific sounds, I don't think I'm going to be shut. I don't think my keyboard reaches the webcam. But for scene-specific sounds, I used the kind of keypad. You know the keypad you get on the right side of your keyboard? I use those numbers to trigger those sounds. And then, like I said earlier, a few sounds are just going to start on their own. As you can see here, I've got a music player script for the Meadow, which is going to play the music Meadow. The Meadow music straight away. I've also got another script here, the sound effects player, which is pretty much playing all my sound effects. But this is going to start on awake. This one specifically will, so that it plays the ambience background sound for the Meadow, which is just like wind and leaves rustling and stuff. So obviously I don't need to trigger that. I'll just have them sitting in the background so I can hear sounds on top of that. So let's have a little demonstration, shall we? Let's do the Meadow level, and I will explain to you, or just demonstrate to you, what that kind of sounds like within this Unity project. Okay, so this is the Meadow level, or at least this is the Meadow music you're listening to now, as well as the background ambience of birds tweeting and leaves rustling. By the way, I also had to come back the next day to do this, hence why I've changed my clothes. But anyway, I'm getting distracted. So, whilst we've got the music playing and the background ambience playing, what I can do is I can take my keyboard and I can trigger some of those general sounds. So if I press Q, that's the sound of like a punch being thrown. If I press W, that's the sound of a human being hit. That's quite an important one. E is the sound of a robot being hit. R is the sound of a robot transforming into a human. T, I love that sound. That's the sound you hear when like you win a level. Y, that's another transform sound, and like so on. You know, you get the idea. I can press any of these buttons and it'll trigger one of the general sounds. We've also got some level specific sounds, hopefully you can see that, which will be triggered by the number pads. So let's press 1. Okay, so that was a cow. That was part of the background ambience. We just wanted some random cow sounds because there's some cow models in the background. So that needs to be nice and quiet, which it is. 2. So that's a beep. Basically, in this level, there's a mechanic where the robots or the NPCs run out of battery, fall over, and then they reveal themselves to be robots. So it plays like that to just say the robot's running out of battery. Then once it has run out of battery, it does that. It falls over and collapses. So yeah, what's quite good is I can combine, or I can play some of these general sounds that I know are very important. For example, the sound of a person being hit on top of these level specific sounds, and just make sure they don't necessarily have to be louder than them, but we just need to make sure we can hear them because they're obviously quite important. So I press W and 3 at the same time. you can still sort of hear both of those two at the same time. So that's all good. So, yeah, that's kind of the process I go for, hitting some buttons and testing some stuff. Now, if I was in the middle of testing something and I wasn't quite sure, I wanted to I didn't want to obviously close Unity and jump into Fmod to make any changes. I wanted to make a change and then straight away listen to how it sounds. What I would do is use Fmod's live, I forgot what it's called now, give me 1 second. Live update function. Now, what live update does is allows you to not only kind of profile your Unity build, which allows you to check things like the CPU usage of audio, how many instances or copies of your events you're playing at once, and if you're kind of destroying them and cleaning up your project correctly, how much memory you've got, etc. You can do all that, but also it allows you to make changes in Fmod that you can then hear straight away within your Unity project, which is what I did a lot. So what we're going to do is we're going to do another level. We're going to demonstrate another level, but this time I'm going to make some adjustments in Fmod using the live update function. Okay, so to demonstrate live updates, we're going to use the sounds for the prison level. So I've set that up in Unity, and let's start by pressing play on our Unity project. There we go. So you can hear the prison music as well as the prison background ambient sounds. Right. So the first thing we need to do now that Unity is running is go into Fmod, and you should be able to see in the bottom right corner a button that says Live Update. Give that a click, and you'll be brought to this window. Now, if you're running your Fmod project on a separate device from your Unity one, but they're both connected to the same internet connection or Wi-Fi, you can select, I believe you can enter the IP address of your Wi-Fi, and I think, I've not done it myself, but I think they should be able to find each other and connect. However, if you're like me and you're running them both on the same device, you can just leave it as localhost, hit connect, and live update should go from syncing to on. Now that it's on, we can make some changes in our Fmod project, which you'll hear straight away in Unity. So let's say we want to turn Billy's music down. Billy, I'm sorry, mate. We're going to have to bring it down a bit. It's a bit loud. You first find the event. So for me, that's prison music. Find whichever part of the music you want to turn down. Maybe you want to turn down something specific. I'm just going to turn it all down. Find the dial, bring it down. And there you go, right? You hear it straight away. And we can also bring it back up again quite easily. There we go. Let's also say we want to turn or change the levels of one of my sound effects. So let's go back into Unity. Let's play some quickly. So, we've got some level specific sounds. Let's press 1. So that, hopefully you heard it, was like an electrical staticky sound. That in this level there are some spotlights, and if those spotlights shine on a robot, it will reveal that robot, and you'll see this like kind of electrical animation on top of it. And that's what that sounds for. But let's say I want to bring it up a bit, it's a bit too quiet. So we'll go into Fmod, we'll find the event, which is box revealed by lights, find the master track, I'm going to turn it up to 10, go back into Unity, try it one more time. And there we go. It's a lot louder now. And that's basically what I did in terms of balancing levels. We just kind of make those adjustments and test them in Unity. Now for this event, I am happy with it being quite quiet, because whilst it's a key mechanic sound, I know that there's a lot of robots in this level, and therefore there will be a lot of instances of this event playing at once. So I don't want it too loud, I just want it quite at a nice level so it can be heard, and yeah, it doesn't sound too loud when too many copies of it are being played. And yeah, that's pretty much it with live updates. So once you're finished making your changes in Fmod, make sure you save them. So hit Control and S, or Command S if you're on a Mac. Then you can go back to the live update button, turn it off, and then you can go back into Unity, and you can press play to end the project. And it's also probably a good idea to go back to Fmod, hit F7 just to rebuild your banks so that they're then carried over into Unity for the next time you do any testing. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper into both projects. As you can see, we've got a game object called bus. Now, this isn't a scene. This is something different. This represents or allows me to control the main buses within our Fmod project. Now, I'm going to jump quickly back into the actual game of Unspottables. I'm going to pause it and go to settings. Now you can see in the settings we've got two options. We've got an option to adjust the music level and an option to adjust the sound effects. Now this is obviously something we need to bear in mind. The player has control over the levels and we have to kind of consider that when balancing ours. So if basically these two settings within our Fmod project, screw it, let's just jump into Fmod and I'll show you. They basically correspond to two buses. Now, this is Fmod. This is the mixer window, by the way, of the same Fmod project, which you can get up by clicking on Window and going to Mixer. Now, there's a lot going on here. Don't let all this overwhelm you. There's only a few, well, we'll look at the rest of them in a bit, but for now, there's only a few buses I want to focus on. So, if you're not aware, all of those events that we were looking at earlier, whoops, let's quickly jump back into the event browser. No, not that. Hold on, give me a second. There we go, the event editor. So all of these events we're looking at, they need routing, right? They can't just all play in the same position or going to the same bus or channel. We need to kind of send them, we don't have to, but we should send them to individual channels or buses depending on what their purpose is. Now when I got my filthy little hands on this project, let's go back to the mixer, there was, I think, only 3 buses. There was this master bus, which is a, this isn't actually the master bus, this yellow one here on the right is the master bus. It seems like we've created our own for some reason, but hey ho, that's there. I can't remember why. Anyway, we've got got like a sub-master bus, I guess we can call that, a music bus, and a sound effects bus. Now, I knew for a fact, go back into Unspottable, that these two options here have been set up to adjust the levels of those two buses. The master, not the master, the music bus and the sound effects bus, okay? So back into Fmod. So that was obviously very important to consider. Now I also knew that the values in that game ranged from 0 to 10. I also knew that I think I made some slight changes, but for the most part these buses were going to start on values, well, more or less 0. For whatever reason, I've turned them down ever so slightly, with a slight bias to my music, as you can sound effects. As you can see, it's turned up a little bit more than music. But these two values here, the values that that Fmod is going to be left at when we press F7 and build our bank files, they are going to be whatever. How do I explain this? They're going to be the highest value that we can possibly set our or music and sound effects to within the game. So if I was to set the music to 10, I'm not going to because it will blare out. Well, not to say that the mix is bad, I just want to make sure you can hear me for this point. If we were to set these both to 10, that would correspond back into Fmod to these faders being at roughly these positions. But if we were to turn them both down to 0, these faders would be down here, okay, if that makes sense. Now I knew that that would be the case because being familiar with Fmod's API, I know that to set the level of buses, you basically use a 0 and a 1 and numbers in between, right? Within the game, if you tell one of these buses to be set to a value of 1, what you're saying is, I want you to set Fmod. I want you to set the fader for this bus to whatever value we left the fader on when we saved and built our banks. So for sound effects, that'd be -1. For music, that would be -3 or 4 or whatever that is. Anything above 1 would be above that level. So if I set within the game the sound effects fader to 1.2, that would be a bit above. If I set it to say 0.5, that would be about halfway down, okay? So you get the idea. Now, talking with the developers, communication was very important for this as well. They told me that when the music setting within the settings is set to 10, that would correspond to that value of 1. And when 0, it's obviously going to correspond to 0. They never went any higher than 1. So great, that was good to know. So go back to Fmod. Knowing that, I knew that these values were never going to go any higher than this. So what I did in Unity, or in my little template, is create these two scripts. So using the script bus control, it's the same script, but I can use it to, I've copied it basically, and as you can see, one of them controls music, the other controls the sound effects, and I basically set them up to almost copy how they'd set up the control of those buses within the game, right? So whenever I adjust the volume of the music bus to 10, again, that's sending the number 1 to Fmod. So go back to Fmod real quick. The music would be set to -3 decibels. But in my project, if I turn it down to, say, 5, that's corresponding to a value of 0.5, which would be about halfway. Essentially, and this is what's happening in the game itself, whatever value we set our settings to, we're dividing that by 10. So, and that's the value we're sending to Fmod. So if it's at 10, divided by 10, you get 1. That's what we send to Fmod. And same again, 5 divided by 10 is 0.5. So with these scripts, I could basically control the levels of those buses as if I were the player, adjusting the levels of the sound effects and the music via the settings within the actual game. So let's do one more demonstration just to show this. I've got the gym level now ready to play. So I'm going to hit play and we're going to listen to the gym music as well as the sounds. Okay, cool. So this is the music for the gym level, and as always, we've got the general sounds to play on top of it, as well as some level specific sounds. Basically that's it. There's the level specific sounds for the gym is just this gym instructor yelling at you. And let's say we're the player, right? And we don't like my sound effects for whatever reason. Maybe that gym instructor is a bit annoying. So what we can do is come over to the sound effects bus, turn that down. We'll turn it down all the way. Let's go like 3, 2-ish. And if I play them, they're really quiet. Let's turn that back up. Alternatively, let's say someone really hated Billy's music. Hard to believe, but it could happen. And they turn that down. We hear that straight away, and then we can play. Oh, whoops, hold on. I need to go back to the game. There we go. We can hear sounds on top of it. Now, my thought process behind doing this was that it would be silly for me to, go around testing what all the sounds and all the music sound like together. With, the music at 6 and then the sound effects at 8, the sound effects at 2 and the music at 4 and so on. There's too many kind of different positions we could set these levels to. That would make things impractical if we were going to test them all. So what I would do is I would basically test them in 2, maybe 3 different ways. The first, I would test them to see if, how things would sound if both buses were turned all the way up. The reason why is because I don't want the game to ever sound too loud and like it's blaring in your ears. One little thing I did to make sure that this didn't happen, or to help prevent this, if I go back into the mixer of the Fmod project, click on the master bus here, and you can see I've added a limiter. So I've just set the ceiling of the limiter to -1 decibels. It's just to make sure that we don't get any clipping and the sounds and the music are just not, right at the top of the ceiling. We've got a tiny bit of headroom, right? That's a nice, easy thing to do. Another thing I would do, if I go back to Unity, is I would test these with the bus settings at about 7. The reason why 7 is because it's not too loud, it's not too quiet, but also I knew that these are the kind of default settings that the developers had set the levels to within the settings of their game, so that when you boot up the game for the first time, the music and the sound effects by default will be at 7. So that was always a good place to start. And then occasionally I'd just turn them both down quite a bit just to make sure that, again, we can hear everything, the sound effects, the music, anything important, everything's coming through nice and clearly, even if everything's turned down quite low. So yeah, that was kind of, for the most part, I was keeping the levels the same. There wasn't really a case where I'd test the music when it's really low with the sound effects really high. I would make sure I keep the buses the same because, like I said, the key is I want to make sure everything cuts through. Generally, the one I relied on most is leaving them both at the default values of 7. Now, I'm not going to dive too much into the actual how I set these scripts up within this video. Again, I want to talk more about my thought process behind the mixing, but I will quickly show you them, and I will have, if you're interested in just copying these scripts and tweaking them yourselves, I'll have a link underneath this video to my website where you can copy these scripts as well as any other scripts from any other videos of mine. Okay, so as you can see, this is the bus control script. Now, it's pretty simple, but like I said, I don't want to dive into the specifics of what each line means and which word means what and how this does that. The thing I want to focus on just for the bus control script is this bit here. So as you can see, this line is what basically sets the volume of the faders in Fmod, the sound effects and the music buses, right? Go back to the script. like I said, I got told this by the developers that those values in the game, 10 to 0, they what they did is to convert them into a 1 and a 0. They would just simply take those numbers, divide them by 10. So I made sure to set that up within my script as well, so I was able to kind of copy the process, and that helped me testing a bit. But yeah, like I said, nice and easy script. That's all you really need for testing the buses using this method. Anyway, time to move on. The next script I created, or the next component that I'd like to talk about is, let's use the arena as a little example, is the music player script. So yeah, this obviously plays music, and it's set up to just play, because all the music just simply starts at the beginning of the scene and ends at the end of the scene. I basically created a script that does that. So let's have a look at the music player script and open it up. Okay, so this one I will talk about a little bit more, because there's probably something in hindsight I could have done a bit better. Now, as you can see, if you're somewhat familiar with Fmod's API, and again, I've got loads of videos on my channel if you're not, that this is another pretty simple script. On the very first frame that's run on this scene, we're going to take this music variable here, which I've created up the top here. It's a Fmod event instance variable type, and I've just called it music. We're going to take that, and we're going to create an instance of whatever music name, or the name of the event I've put into this public string. So if I jump back into Unity, this is the string here, music name, and I can use this little button here, click on that, and select the music event for the corresponding scene, which is this line here allows me to do that. Click that little button, event ref. Anyway, pick your music, tell it to start on the very first frame of the scene. Like I said, it starts straight away. And if I scroll down to... Oh, okay, well, I haven't told it to stop because I suppose I didn't need to. Every time I ended this Unity project, it would stop on its own anyway. So, yeah, we just tell it to start straight away. Now, we've got some parameter stuff here. Now, for the most part, let's go into Fmod for a moment. Let's close some of these tabs and let's take a look at the events. For the most part, the music was pretty simple. If I click on the music... Okay, bad example. That one's a bit complicated. Let me find arena music. There we go. So for the most part, Billy's music was pretty simple. You just had a track that looped, right? But there were a few instances where we wanted to mix things up a bit, have things change a bit dynamically depending on what was going on. So to do that, we used Fmod Parameters. Again, I've got videos on this channel about parameters. So let's find a little example of that. What would be good? Music for the factory? No, it doesn't have any. Music for prison does, I know that. I'll tell you what, I know one. The sushi bar has 2 parameters, I think. Oh, here we go. This is nice and complicated. Okay, so here's the music for the sushi bar level. Now, there's 2 kind of modes that can happen within this game, or this scene. Basically, there is a mechanic in this scene where you can trigger a mouse to come out and distract any other players. If you've made it really obvious who you are, you can send this mouse out, the camera will zoom into the mouse, and follow that, so other players lose track of where you are. When that happens, we change the music slightly. Again, this was set up. I didn't set this up. This was how the project was given to me. So we've got the mouse mode music here, which goes from 0 to 1. So if I quickly play this event with mouse mode at 0, here's some music. Change it to 1. Changes when the mouse appears. We've also got another parameter called for items collected. Again, in this scene, there's items as well. Once you've collected all 4, we change the music slightly. So if I play the music again, this time, let's say we've collected all the items. Things kind of speed up a little bit. Oh, what happened? Oh, suddenly the mouse has appeared. Changes again. So as you can see, there's a few layers to this. We've not only got the mouse mode and the 4 items collected parameters, but those 2 can kind of combine together on top of each other, right? So obviously I had to test for this when it came to mixing. So let's jump back into Unity. Now I've got here some fields. Wait, let's find the actual sushi bar thing. There we go. Let's turn that on. So as you can see, we've got some parameter name fields here and parameter values. So what I would do is type the name of the parameters in. So for the sushi bar, it was mouse mode and 4 items collected. And then I can use these parameters underneath to set, well, maybe not that extreme, but I could, use these values to set, use these variables rather to set the value of those parameters. So whilst the game is playing, I could change it from 0 to 1, for example, which I'll demonstrate in a second. But going back into the script, as you can see, I've created this function called param. It takes two parameters, not Fmod parameters. These are now C# coding parameters for functions. I know it's a bit confusing, but yeah, 2 parameters. One is called name, and the other is called value. One is of the string type, which takes characters. The other is float, which takes value. So obviously that corresponds to the name of the parameter and the value I want to set it to. And then on the update function, we're just constantly calling that function for each parameter. So as you can see, I'm feeding the name of the first parameter, mouse mode, and the value of the parameter into the function, right? And then it just keeps, it uses this set parameter by name function to just keep updating stuff, right? So let's quickly jump into Unity and let's test how the sushi bar scene would kind of be mixed. Okay, so this is the sushi music. So as always, on top of the music that we can hear and the background ambience, we've got our general sounds, as well as some level specific sounds. So that's the sound of the mouse that you can use to distract other players with. We've also got, so that's a bell sound. I'll play that again. So that plays when when someone's collected all the items and they've basically finished the level. Now let's say we're playing through the game and suddenly someone has triggered the mouse. Well, what I could do is go into the inspector of Unity, change the parameter value of parameter 1 from 0 to 1. We can hear that change in music. And then, with that change in music, we can do some more testing. Can we hear everything? Yes, we can. Then we can also change that back to 0. We can also trigger the second parameter. And on top of that, we can also trigger both of them at the same time. Yeah, and again, that's a scream, by the way, when a mouse has been spotted. Yeah, so we can basically trigger all those sounds, no matter which kind of parameter setting we have, or rather we have the option to, set the parameters to whatever we want, so we can make sure everything can be heard no matter what happens with the music. Now, luckily, the music in that scenario is quite, how do I describe it? It's not like blaring at you, is it? It's not like club music. It does its job quite nicely. It sits in the background. You can hear it, and it changes dynamically, obviously. But yeah, it's very easy to kind of balance things for that level. But obviously, it's very important to make sure that we balance things, remembering that things can change, that we have these dynamic parameters that could change how the music sounds, basically. It could be louder, it could be quieter. You might even have like different frequencies depending on what instruments might be brought into the track via the parameter, which might kind of clash with some high sound effects. So yeah, it's just another way of testing all the scenarios that could possibly happen within this game. Now, let's talk about the sound effects player script. Now, this is a big one because there's a lot of sound effects that can play in many different ways. Like I said, music was pretty simple because it always started at the beginning of the scene, stopped at the end of it. Sound effects, on the other hand, there are a few different kind of variations in terms of how they can be played. Again, for this there's a bit more going on, so we're not going to talk too much about the details and the nitty-gritty of the script, but there are just a few things that I will quickly cover that I've created, depending on, again, and it's things I need to test, basically, in terms of how these sounds are going to be played. So if I can jump back into Unity, we've got some public fields. First is called sound effects, and this just allows me to select what sound effects I'd like to play. We've then got key, which allows me to select a key on my keyboard for triggering it. Obviously, that's not going to happen in the game, but that's just for testing purposes. I did that using this variable type, key code, made it public so I can access it in Unity, called it key, and if I scroll down, you can see within an if statement I've said if input.getKeyDown, which means if a key is pressed once on a frame, and I'm feeding the variable key, the one I created earlier here, into it. So whatever I set that within Unity, let's say I set it to the spacebar, our if statement would be basically checking to see if the spacebar was pressed on a single frame, right? It's not being held down, it's just being pressed. It would then play a certain sound effect. And there's a few more conditions I'm checking, but we'll get onto them in a second. We've then got the start and awake, which is, that's pretty much for background sounds, right? So let's see if I've got a background sound on the sushi bar. Okay, we don't. Bad example. Let's go to theatre, I think has some. Yes, here we go. So the theatre level has some a kind of ambient sound, has a lot of spectators kind of whispering in the background. So that, again, thanks to the communication from the developers, I knew that that was going to start straight away and end when the scene's finished, similarly to the music. So start and awake, by ticking that, it's going to play the sound automatically for me. I don't have to trigger it with my keyboard, okay? So it's for long ambiances or just long looping sounds that are going to start straight away. Next is on off. So some sounds aren't just going to play once and finish. Some sounds are going to turn on and off. Earlier we talked about the electrical sound on the robots. That's a good example. So let's go into Fmod. So this isn't the sound that starts straight away, but it is a sound that loops. So I need to be able to turn it on and off with my keypad. Where is it? There we go. So here, as you can see, it loops. If I were to just trigger it in the same way I'm triggering all the sounds, just by pressing it once and letting it play, it's obviously not going to stop, which is a bit awkward when I'm trying to test other sounds. I need to kind of be able to stop it and go, okay, I'm done with that, let's move on. So yeah, that's what that field is for, on, off. Again, by the way, so start on awake and on, off, I'm checking in these if statements before I play the sound. As you can see, I've created my own two functions here, one called play event, one called play held event. Play event is just basically if it's going to play once and then stop on its own. So we check the key. If start and awake is not true, and if on off is not true, then we'll do that. However, here we've got play held event, which will play, if I press a key, if start on awake is not true, but on off is, if we've ticked that box, then it will play the event, but if I press it again, we'll trigger play event again, and that will actually turn it off. And if I scroll down, you can see play event is doing some magic here, which is telling the sound effects to start and stop each time it's pressed. Now the last field for the sound effects player is this one, number of instances. Now as I briefly mentioned earlier, there were a few scenarios where some of these events would be triggered more than once at the exact same time. Now if that happens too many times, we're going to be playing the same sound on top of each other and it's going to get really loud and sound really messy. So what we need to do is limit the amount of instances of that sound that happen at once. A good example is this kind of pop sound that happens within the start scene. There's a sound that plays whenever these NPCs... I'll tell you what, let me show you it. Okay, so this is the start scene, right? So I've got two players here. Well, it's just me and the keyboard. But we've got two players here who are about to start the game. Now, this is just a little fun, quirky thing that the developers set up and added sound to. So let's say all the players are ready to start. They're in the center. If I press the start button now, have a look and a listen to what happens. Now we hear like a popping sound, right? And we hear that for each of those robots. There's about 30 robots there, each of them transforming to a person within the space of like a quarter or a third of a second. It happens really quick. And the way they set it up within their game, code and scripting wise, is that when each one transforms, it tells Fmod to play the transform sound, which sounds like, oh, hold on, sounds like this, right? Now you can imagine that being played 30 times on top of itself. It's just going to go and sound really messy and loud and hurt your ears. So that's something we had to consider. Now, this is where number of instances come in. What I was able to do, using some clever scripting stuff, is limit the amount of instances, or rather, no, sorry, not limit. I can play a certain amount of copies of that that event, on top of each other. So if I set number of instances to 5, and play Unity here and press the R key, which you can see will trigger the event, that would play this event 5 times on top of each other. So I could say, okay, that was way too loud. We don't want that many playing at once. Now, it's a little bit different for these because they're not exactly playing on top of each other. Well, some of them are. Some of them are playing a slight delay after. But for the majority, there's probably about 5 to 10 copies of this sound being played at the exact same time before the next 5 to 10 and the next 5 to 10, right? So it was important. That was something very important to consider. How many instances of an event can be played at a certain time. And there's a few more examples within the game where that happens, some of which I actually missed. So when the game first came out, you had these instances of sounds just blaring at you because too many were playing at once. But yeah, using this, I was able to go into Fmod and adjust some settings to prevent that from happening. Okay, so here's the transform event, right, that was playing whenever one of those robots turned into a person, okay? Now, so like I said, I didn't have any control over how this was scripted and coded within the game, but what I do have is my little secret weapon within Fmod. So to allow this to play not too many times, but to save the developers the job of messing around with code, I adjusted the... Oh, hold on, I'm going to have to move my webcam. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. Now you should hopefully see it. So in the bottom right corner, when I've got the master track selected on this event, we've got this option here called cooldown. Cooldown basically forces Fmod to not play your event after a certain amount of time that the event's already been played. I.e., if this event is played, Fmod has to wait 20 milliseconds in this case before it can play it again, even if the game and the scripting is saying play the event again, right, within less than 20 milliseconds. So it's kind of a sneaky way to override the logic that they've created within the game's code. So yeah, by setting it to 20 milliseconds, it sounds like nothing, but that was enough to kind of just give some breathing room between the amount of instances that were playing within that scenario. So whilst, like, say, a group of 5 robots turned into humans all at once, the sound would only be played once. Then it would wait, and let's say 10 milliseconds had passed, and the game tried to play it again. Fmod would say, no, you're not playing it again, it's too soon. But once 20 milliseconds would pass and another robot transformed, it would say, okay, now you can play it again. And what this did is it prevented too many sounds playing on top of each other, and, you know, left a little, even a slight gap, but left the gap nonetheless to give the event a bit of breathing room, so it sounds a bit nicer. You're not getting that kind of... It's not just blaring at you loads of sounds at once, which is, I think, a very easy mistake to make if you're just not familiar with that kind of issue. So yeah, that was something that was really important to test for. Okay, the final thing I would like to talk about is snapshots. Now, let's jump into Fmod. Let's go back to our Mixer tab. Now, Snapshots was a little addition that I introduced to the developers right at the end. Now, like I said earlier, for the most part, they gave me this Fmod project, and I didn't really do much to it. I just used it for mixing. But I did add these return buses, which I then added some reverbs to. So we've got a reverb for the disco level, reverb for the prison level, so some of the sounds sound like they're bouncing off of concrete. It's the spaceship level. The spaceship level takes place in like a UFO dome, so there's glass everywhere, obviously, so I wanted to filter things a bit, and so on, right? So we've added some reverbs just to give things a little bit of life, I suppose. And then, yeah, so what I did is I wanted to route some of the buses for the sounds, route some of the buses into these return buses so that we could add a bit of reverb to them. Now, I didn't do too much. I didn't add too many sounds to it. Mainly because some of these, again, this is kind of where communication was lacking on my end. Some of the reverbs I actually baked into the actual audio files themselves, not because I wasn't really sure how we were going to do reverb. But the sounds I didn't add reverb to were those general sounds I mentioned earlier that could play within any scene. For obvious reason, I need the punches to sound like they can be heard anywhere, so there's no reverb. Now, as you can see, within the sound effects bus, I've I've got a punches bus. So this has all the events to do with punching. All these events, before they go to the master bus, the audio or the sound will be sent to this bus, which would then be sent to the sound effects bus, then the master, and then to our ears, right? So if I click on the punches bus, you can see that I've got these sends all the way down here, prior to the send, which is this fader, that sends it to the master bus. And this is going to send a split signal into each of these, let's quickly close it up, each of these return buses, right? Depending on what level we're in. Now, again, this is something I've talked about in the past, so I'm not going to delve too much into it. But all you need to know is that I've set up these return buses with a send from the punch bus into them, right? The thing is, however, if I click on one, as you can see here, the spaceship reverb, they all start at -infinity, 0, so we're not going to hear any reverb once we start the game. What I wanted to do is control them with snapshots. So here, if I click on the snapshots tab, we've got this snapshot. Snapshots you can kind of turn on and off, right, like a switch. So if I click on the prison snapshot, as you can see, all these kind of now all the buses are kind of marked with outlines. They're like the ones not being used by this snapshot. So I just had to quickly move my webcam to make sure you can see this. Now, by selecting the prison snapshot, we can see any changes that will happen when this snapshot is turned on within our game. Now, if we take a look at the prison reverb, we can see the fader is at just under 0 dB. But if I unselect the snapshot, you can see it drops down to -infinity. So that means when this snapshot is turned on, that reverb for the prison will also be turned on and applied to those punch sounds. So this is obviously important because we need to make sure that the reverb fits in with the mix. We don't want it to be too loud or too quiet, just like the actual sound effects or the music. So let's go on to the spaceship because I know it has one. So I used the sound effects player script again to test these snapshots. Just like normal events, you can basically use the same sort of code to tell these snapshots to turn on and off. So as you can see here, I've set the spaceship snapshot, which is going to add a bit of reverb and a filter to keypad button 6, right? And then I've just told it, I've set it to on and off so I can turn it on and off and have a listen to how that sounds, how that changes the sounds. So let's quickly have a listen to that. Okay, so we can hear the spaceship music, and if I press Q, W, or E, we get those general sounds. Now, let's have a listen to see what happens if I press 6 on my keypad, turning on that snapshot for the snapshot for the spaceship to add a bit of reverb to it. So there you go. You should hear, there's not only is there now a little bit of a tail, but they've also been filtered slightly, again, because they're in that kind of glass dome. And then what I can do is I can also turn it off and just have a listen to see how they sound when they are dry. I will show you one more. Okay, so I created a snapshot for whenever you open the pause menu. So let me quickly go to click start scene, turn start scene on, and press play. So let's say you've just booted the game up, you're in that start scene, everyone's grabbing their controllers and getting ready to play. We've got the general sounds. Oh, whoops, hold on. There we go. We've also got some sounds for flicking through the UI. That's the main one. So that's if you're like in the menus and you're kind of selecting, I don't know, which level, no, well, adjusting those settings we looked at earlier, the music and the sound effects and any graphic settings, etc. What I did is I created a snapshot that just filters things quite heavily. So if I press, I believe, Z or Z, there you go. Filtered, right? So now, what that's done is specifically filter the music as opposed to the sound effects. So now we can test those kind of UI buttons on top of that. Let's also change this parameter of the music to, well, actually, hold on first. Let's turn the snapshot off. Let's go to this parameter for the music and let's turn it to 1. We should hear the music come in now. There we go. Now we get some more instruments. So we start the game, everything's normal, and then pause menu gets filtered. We can flick through, set my graphic settings, HD, full screen, turn the sound effects up, and yeah, we're done. Let's hit save and leave the main menu. There we go. So yeah. So some of the snapshots, obviously, as you can hear, control the music as well. Again, something to consider when mixing. Whew, okay, that was a long one, but I think with that, we're done. So yeah, that's pretty much the process I went through mixing Unspottables. Now, like I said, there was a few things I missed, but yeah, generally, this works really well, this kind of makeshift Unity project that I integrated the Fmod one into, and yeah, I'm quite proud of it. It's always, like I said earlier, it's not ideal for every game because there's just, for some, there's going to be so many kind of variables that will control how your sounds will be played back to the player, and you really do need access to the game to test things. But for me, this worked really well, saved time. Was quite fun to do as well. I think I've talked about everything I wanted to. Bit of a long one, but thank you for sitting through it with me. Hopefully you found it helpful. Like I said, I'll try my best to link YouTube videos on this channel about topics that I've talked about or kind of glossed over, scripting wise, if you're interested. Links to Billy, who made the music, great guy, will also be in the description. Check him out. And have a bunch of fun stuff you might want to look into. And yeah, hopefully in the future I'll be doing some more videos like this. Thanks, by the way, to everyone who commented asking for this video about mixing. That was really helpful. And I think that's it from me. So I've been Henry Scott. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.